Hello, and welcome to Phenomenon Radio, the show that covers thought-provoking breakthroughs in the fields of UAP UFOs to discover fascinating truths, first-hand accounts, and investigative insights into the expanding confluence of physical and mental exposure to this worldwide phenomenon. Hosted by world-renowned experiencer of the 1980 Rendlesham Bentwaters UFO incident, John Burroughs, and Emmy Award-winning investigative journalist, Moulton Howe. And now, leading off the program, here's Moulton Howe.
33 years ago, on October 2nd, 1983, the News of the World in England on its front page had 3-inch headlines. UFO lands in Suffolk, and that's official. Written by Keith Beebe, based on his interview with a whistleblower called Art Wallace, who we know was RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge Airman Larry Warren from his 1997 book with Peter Robbins, Left at Eastgate. Writing in Chapter 7 entitled 1983 Front Page News in the original 1997 hardcover book, Larry Warren wrote on pages 99 to 100 about the people he was talking to a few weeks before that October 2nd, 1983 News of the World groundbreaking headline. Larry wrote, quote, "Many people in the UFO field began to hear about the Bentwaters incident, the Halt document, and the witness who had blown the whistle, me. I made an agreement with Fawcett and Greenwood to speak about the event if my real name were not used. Barry came up with the pseudonym Art Wallace, in quotes. I hated the name, but wanted to protect my privacy and that of my family. I remembered quite clearly the debriefers' threat that bullets were cheap. In reality, I knew hiding behind another name was useless. I knew that anyone who really wanted to find out who Art Wallace was, for whatever reason, would find out. On the next page, 100. Also calling from the UK that week was Keith Beebe, a reporter with the News of the World, a tabloid with the largest circulation in Britain. Sunday night, October 2nd, 1983, Barry Greenwood called to say the News of the World had broken the story in England. Their front page headline read, quote, UFO lands in Suffolk, and that's official, close quote. Joining Phenomenon Radio is Ronnie Dugdale from Great Yarmouth, England, a longtime Rendlesham Forest researcher who has original audio excerpts of reporter Keith Beebe talking with Larry Warren on Wednesday, September 28th, 1983, only 4 days before the October 2nd, 1983 front page headline, byline by Keith Beebe, UFO lands in Suffolk, and that's official.
Tonight, we're going to go into how the News of the World story came about with Ronnie Dugdale. Ronnie, I want to thank you for joining Linda and I tonight.
You're welcome.
So what we're going to do is we're going to go through some questions. We're going to get a response back from you. And the very first question I'm going to ask is for you to briefly outline for the listeners how the News of the World came to hear about the Rendlesham story incident and what the source of the material you have based your research on that you will be discussing in tonight's show.
Okay then. Jenny, Dot and Brenda, they kept notes and diaries and journals during their years investigating. Dot also recorded all her telephone conversations, she says, to assist her in writing up her notes. All three of the investigators have been very helpful towards me over the years and have shared the records, they've shared the documents, they've shared everything with me. They've been helpful in emails and they've helped me along the way. So most of this research is as a result of them three ladies. Right, the tapes and diaries and journals, they proved to be invaluable to me because they recall the facts of who said what, where and when as they were written in real time. As we know, time can affect your memory and distort the facts. So we see what was written at that time paints a much better picture for all others and what's being felt as well and what was being said. Brenda had always been supportive towards me and she'd been helpful and forthcoming in sharing her archives. We spent many hours going over countless pages of information from her research, interviews and notes. Brenda trusted me and allowed me to take anything I wanted home if I needed to investigate it further. We worked extremely well together.
Okay. Now, how did the News of the World get to hear about the Rendlesham Forest incident in the first place?
Okay, so now, if you remember back to one of our last shows, Dot got sent a document from CAUSE, which was Citizens Against UFO Secrecy, and that was the HALT document. Now, the saga started at the Bufora conference in August 1983. Brenda, Butler, Dot Street, they were given a platform to present the facts of the Rendlesham Forest incident. They would reveal, Jenny just received a letter from Pam Titchmarsh of the MOD. This predates the HALT document, and what it was, that was a letter from Pam Titchmarsh admitting that something really did go off on that Christmas period at Rendlesham. Didn't say too much. It just said, yes, there were lights and things were documented, and there was this HALT document. So they were going to reveal this, and they were going to, that was as far as Jenny knew, they were going to reveal this letter, and also they'd been down to see the MOD in the meantime with the HALT document. Jenny didn't know that they were going to spring a surprise on them, which is to present the HALT document. So at the Bufora meeting, Dot, Brenda and Jenny, they were going to reveal the results of their visit to the MOD in Whitehall. They arrived there unannounced at Whitehall. They confronted the MOD staff with a copy of the HALT memo, and all hell was let loose. So for over 2 years, the UFO community in the UK, they'd disbelieved what the girls had said. They'd had different investigations from other UFO societies. I think SUFFOLK was one of them, and they all come up with the same thing, saying, oh, it's all a load of rubbish. 3 ladies running about, not really knowing what they're doing, not very professional, and there was nothing to their claims. So at this meeting, they were going to have their told you so moment. That was especially important because there was important people there. Dr. J. Allen Hynek was coming over for the lecture there. So Jenny already knew Allen Hynek. They'd first met in 1981, and Jenny had discussed it with him from the earliest days, the Rendlesham incident, and he knew something that the girls had to keep digging and from the get-go to keep researching. 3 months later, when Jenny and Dot travelled to the States to research their book Sky Crash, Dot and Jenny were invited to stay with Alan in Evanston. He put them up, and to cut a long story short, Jenny stayed there and house sat for him while he went away, and Alan gave her the free run of all his archives, which, it must have been amazing for Jenny. And because the Bufora event was going to attract reporters, they specifically chose to set up the Rendlesham revelations unadvertised and outside of the main event. So when the main event was closed, they were then going to have this session. There was going to be other key researchers there who they could trust. It started late at night when all the other delegates had drifted away for the day, and it ran into the early hours. But it gave them both their moment to show that there really was a big case after all. Despite going to all the lengths of keeping it secretive, in the days afterwards, a journalist had been tipped off by someone inside the room, or told what had happened by someone who was inside the room. Brenda and Dot always suspected that person was Harry Harris. In later years, Georgina Brony asked News of the World journalist Keith Beebe, who wrote the headlines UFO Lands in Suffolk, if it was Harry Harris, and he said yes, that their suspicions were confirmed. That was Harry Harris who first contacted the newspaper. And the girls discovered that the group of investigators led by Harry Harris, they'd had a secret meeting on the base with HALT, and they kept that as a secret from them. The group were paying for their costs involved in their work in ufology by selling stories to the tabloids, long before the News of the World story ever came out.
Ronnie, could I just ask a question here?
Yeah.
Why would Harry Harris have the ability to talk with HALT? Why would Harry Harris have this connection and link to Keith Beebe?
Well, I'll get to that in a little while. But Harry Harris got a meeting with HALT. I think he was going to get him involved with a story. We'll have to get to that later. But
well, let's understand going forward, who is this guy, Harry Harris, and why would he have had that ability to talk with HALT and to News of the World?
Okay, Harry Harris was a solicitor from Manchester. He spearheaded a group of Manchester UFO people, one of which Jenny was a member of it. And they had been selling stories to the tabloid press. They'd sold to the News of the World before, so they'd had some interaction with Derek Jameson, who was the editor at the time. They'd sold to the Daily Mirror, so he was well known for selling UFO stories.
This Harry Harris was an attorney, solicitor in England, attorney in the United States, and he had then been the middleman on many UFO stories for News of the World with people from all over. So he would negotiate fees with the News of the World for those UFO stories?
That's right. What he would do, him and his little group, mostly that was just Harry Harris, Mike Sachs, who was a tailor, and the other person whose name has been kept out of the story for years, his name was Norman Collinson. And the reason his name was kept out of the story for years, because he was actually a detective chief inspector of Manchester Police.
And did this police inspector work hand in hand with your solicitor or attorney, Harry Harris?
Yes, he most certainly did.
Okay. Do you have any further background information about why that attorney and why that policeman would have that collaboration on UFO stories?
No, only that they were ufologists and they sold their stories to fund their their activities. If they had any lab reports needed doing, it all come out of the kitty for selling the stories. They weren't very popular. That actually caused a rift in the end with that Manchester UFO Society, and they went their separate ways.
Well, do you mean, just so we're clear going forward, how much money would have been involved between your solicitor attorney and the police officer and the Art Wallace / Larry Warren in this particular case of October 2nd, 1983?
Okay, so when they first started up, very little money was on the table. That wasn't until the last couple of days before that went to press that the money increased. But at the start, they were talking about £5,000 to be split 6 ways. Now,
which is about, what, $6,000, $6,500?
I mean, the exchange rate in them days was $2.70 to the pound.
So $10,000.
Yeah.
Okay, and if it started at £5,000 and $10,000, do you have any hard evidence of where it ended up for the Art Wallace interview with News of the World with Keith Beebe?
No, all we know is that towards the very end of negotiations, Harry Harris was not going to sell the story to the News of the World for £5,000, and at the last minute that went up to £12,000. Now we don't know exactly. Harry Harris was a very good negotiator. That could have been that other newspapers had got involved and they wanted the story, because I do know that the Daily Mirror were tipped off because the Daily Mirror had contacted Jenny trying to get the story from Jenny. Unbeknown to the Daily Mirror, they didn't know Jenny was involved with this story. They had no idea, and they tried to get the story out of her, and they offered much more than what the figure that ended up the News of the World paying for the story to Harry Harris and Co.
Okay, just one final question. Do you or Jenny have any hard paper evidence that the News of the World, through Harry Harris, the attorney, paid £12,000 to Art Wallace / Larry Warren for the October 2nd, 1983 story?
No, Warren wasn't in for any money to come from it. That was spread amongst the team in Britain.
Okay.
I mean, if Larry Warren got any money, Linda, that would have come from his interview he done with Bob Smith, who was the US agent for the News of the World. I mean,
okay.
I can't understand it.
Just one final clarity, just because this is so important.
Right.
The £12,000 that you and Brenda know about then was paid between the News of the World and the solicitor attorney Harry Harris and whoever he distributed it to not the Art Wallace, Larry Warren.
No, Art Wallace, Larry Warren was not on the payroll for that. If Art Wallace got any money, and he says he didn't, and I have no reason to disbelieve him, that would have come from his interview, I would have thought, which he said was in more detail, to Bob Smith. But I'm not even certain if the way Larry talks about it on this tape is that he knew who he'd spoken to, because he couldn't say to Keith Beebe exactly who the newspaper was or who he'd spoke to, which is, hard to understand, really. If he was trying to keep out of the story, you'd want to know who he was giving the story to, I would have thought. £12,000, there's no paperwork to say there's £12,000. Brenda has got a letter from the editor saying who got paid, but the amount, that was all down to how it was split up, was all down to Harry Harris, and it wasn't split up fairly either. Jenny got 2,000, Dot got 1,500, Brenda got 1,500, and the rest was split up amongst the other three. So that was supposed to have been officially amongst Mike Sachs and Harry Harris, but this other chap, who was the chief police inspector, the deputy police inspector of Manchester Police on the fraud squad, his had to be paid under the counter. Now, you might think it's because of his position in the police force, or he might have had some other reason why there couldn't be a paper trail for it, but he did get a cut.
Because he didn't want to pay taxes on the money, probably, and we are talking about £12,000, equaling about $25,000 back then in 1983.
Yeah, well, I suspect no one wanted to pay any tax on the money. I would think it was more because he shouldn't have been. That wouldn't have looked very good for a deputy chief inspector of a fraud squad selling UFO stories. I don't think that would have done his career any good at all. That's my take on it.
Oh, and by the way, guys, just so, at the pound being 270, it would have been closer to 30-some thousand, not 25 even. It was, if you took another dollar per, you'd be pushing 33,000, which was quite a bit of money back in that time frame.
Yeah, that was a lot of money.
And that emphasizes that the News of the World and the reporter Keith Beebe knew that they had quite a story and that they had enough to back it up, in the sense that Art Wallace / Larry Warren, who describes this scene in his own book, his own 1997 book, that he talked with Keith Beebe on the phone, and that he was Art Wallace, a name that was given to him by Barry Greenwood in the work that he was doing with Larry Fawcett and Barry Greenwood on the book Clear Intent.
Okay, Ronnie, go ahead and go forward, and I'll ask the next question.
Okay, so there we have it. Harry Harris was the person who tipped off the News of the World in the first place. Jenny, Dot and Brenda, they had no interest whatsoever in going to the media. They just negotiated the deal for their book, Sky Crash. They'd bounded it about everywhere and got the knockback, but they'd found this publisher, Neville Sturman, and they'd started writing the book. And the last thing they wanted was for a story to come out. Jenny, who's written loads of books, she was very aware of the premature publicity for a story, how it could kill the book, possibly even losing the contract. And it prevented the publisher selling serial rights on release. And the News of the World, actually, that did do that to them. So it was tricky for them. As soon as it became clear that forces were moving to create a story in the press outside of their control, the only option they faced was, the options they faced was either to ignore it or cooperate with them.
So why do you think they cooperated with the News of the World at the risk of upsetting their publisher? Was it for the money?
No, I don't feel it was ever about the money. Speaking to Brenda and Dot and Jenny, I'm sure they had expenses coming out of their own pockets. They were facing really financial ruin. That was tough times, and to investigate for how long this had taken, that had taken over their lives. It put a strain on Dot's marriage. Her husband had forbid her to use the phone. She'd had phone bills, 4-figure phone bills, ringing the States up all the while. Well, she rang everyone up, and not just for 5 minutes. Dot, she can talk for England. But it was that was never about the money. I mean, the figure being offered, split 6 ways, wouldn't have even covered their expenses. Now, Jenny felt that Brenda and Dot deserved the public recognition for their investigation, so that's why it happened. They all felt the only way they could keep And what they knew about the case factual was to get involved and assist where they could. I mean, they definitely didn't trust the team or Harry Harris and Mike Sachs. I know that by reading through the journals. There was lots of skullduggery going on. They'd had this secret meeting with Holt and they hadn't told the girls about it. And there was a bit of bad feeling there. And I think the girls felt if they didn't get involved, God
Ronnie,
knows what the story
can
was.
I ask a question here?
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible that it was Colonel Holt himself who provoked this meeting with Harry Harris because they knew each other?
Well, I don't think they did know each other. I think Harry Harris got a meeting with Holt, which wasn't hard to do. I mean, Doc got a meeting with Holt. I mean, that was fairly easy to get on that base, and you only had to pick the phone up and ask him. And, I mean, the reason Doc got a meeting with Holt was because she had the Holt memo and because he wanted to know what they were going to do with it. He was worried for his life. He was worried for his job. That's how he got. And Harry Harris, who knows what he said to him to get a meeting. Maybe he offered him something. We don't know.
Okay, and I'm looking at the Holt memo right now, dated January 13th, 1981, on Department of the Air Force Headquarters, 81st Combat Support Group, U.S. Air Force. And this was a New York zip code, and it starts at the top, subject, unexplained lights, signed by Charles I. Holt, Lieutenant Colonel, U.S. Air Force Deputy Base Commander at RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge, which was then the largest NATO base in Europe. And for people who might not be aware of this 3-paragraph memo, the very fact that it was written on January 13th, 81, according to this release, that was only 2 weeks after the December 26th to 28th phenomena in the forest. Between this document and Harry Harris and the meetings with Colonel Holt, Ronnie, do you know how many other people Colonel Holt had talked with about this memo?
Well, I think he kept it quiet. I mean, if anyone contacted the base, they were told there was no documents, there was nothing. And the only copy that Holt had was what he describes as his onion skin copy from the typewriter. I don't know. I don't think anyone else got to speak to him. I think Dot was probably the first one because the shock on Holt's voice when Dot rang him up, I mean, he was horrified that this had come out. He was told that had never come out.
He said that.
Yeah, Holt said that was never designed to come out. That was never left to the MOD. He was promised that would never come out. But that
goes to the heart of the confusion in that first sentence in the first paragraph that has been there for 30 some years. Paragraph 1, early in the morning of 27 December 80 at approximately 0300, 2 U.S. Air Force Security Police patrolmen saw unusual lights outside the back gate at RAF Woodbridge. And then it goes on. But the date itself, as we now know, he was referencing the Jim Peniston, John Burroughs event, we think. That was in the early morning hours of December 26th, not the 27th, and that the phenomena went from December 26th after midnight to December 28th after midnight, raising the question, would somebody who was the deputy base commander of RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge actually make a conscious mistake or make a mistake, an unconscious mistake, in the first sentence on the date of something that was that significant?
Well, I don't think that was ever meant to be significant. I think what it was, when he read, there was a memo, it wasn't, there wasn't a report. This was a memo sent to the MOD designed to get them to react and investigate, but they never did. I mean, he was amazed. No one ever rung him. No one ever contacted him. That was Don Moulton, who was a British base liaison officer, who said, you need to send something. You got to type something up. Do a memo. And then because that never got sent until 2 weeks after the event, because Don Moulton was away on holiday in Wales. It wasn't until he come back. Holt gave him this memo and he sent it with a covering letter.
And if I'm understanding you, Ronnie, you're saying that Colonel Halt has gone on the record stating that he never had any reply or interaction from anybody at RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge on this memo.
He had nothing from anyone.
Is it possible that it is because what he told John Burroughs and me at the National Press Club a few years ago, that he was angry and upset that he was left out of the loop when he knew for a fact that within 24 hours of midnight, December 26, 1980, the National Security Agency, the NSA of the United States, took over the entire RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge investigation?
Yeah, I'm sure that's what it was, because that seems a really weird setup for someone on the outside to understand that the deputy base commander of the biggest NATO bases in Europe weren't in the loop. But that's how it was. I mean, he was the boss man on the base. Well, he wasn't really. He was like, John will have to help me out on this. I think he was fourth in the pecking order, wasn't he, John, when it comes to seniority?
Right, and I want to add a couple of things to it that I'm aware of that you guys probably aren't. One of the interesting things was that Gordon Williams did do an interview later on with James Fox, and James Fox asked him about the memo, and Williams said that, you know, he didn't know about the memo. It was passed under doors, that it went out without him knowing about it, and the fact is that if he'd have known about it, what was in it was something that he may not have even allowed to be released, because there were things in there that the Air Force couldn't defend. But on response back after that interview, I sent Halt a message asking him about that. And what Halt implied to me was this: they were all aware of it, that the early meeting on, once the tape was given to 3rd Air Force, basically listened to it. And what it turned into was a hot potato. The British were notified immediately. The British police were, the fire department was, they responded. There was people in the woods or in the area right after the incident that were identified with working with, you know, some level of government asking questions. So what it seemed to be was, based on what Halt told me, that they were going to keep Williams away from this, not his name put into this because of the severity or the possibility of his career, and even Conrad, that Halt became the fall guy on this. And what they simply did was, after both sides were looking at it, both sides didn't want to really handle it or deal with it, so it was a football back and forth, and the memo was just basically written to the British to throw the weight, like you said, Ronnie, on them to do something with it, since technically the Air Force shouldn't have been involved in the first place because it happened outside the gate. Does that make some sense?
Sure, but let me just say one thing, John. Williams did know about the memo because Keith Beebe rung Williams up, and he told him that if he asked that they were trying to find out about the authenticity of the memo, and he said Halt isn't not the type of person to make something like that up.
Right, but what Williams was just implying was that he didn't know the memo was sent to the British in the first place. He knew about it afterwards, but he did not know the fact that the memo was written by Halt and forwarded to the British, which I've always found that absurd for one reason. Nothing like that would ever go to another government without the wing commander being involved in it. Do you know what I'm saying?
And John and Ronnie, isn't it true that there is that famous photograph in Georgina Bruni's book, You Can't Tell the People, about RAF Bentwaters, the quote from Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister, and in her book is a photograph of the Suffolk policeman with Mike Verona at the site in the forest with the 3 pegs in a triangular pattern on the ground. That photograph would have been the daylight of December 26, after John Burroughs, Jim Penniston, and Ed Kavansak had been in the forest. That photograph had to have been seen by Conrad and Gordon Williams, the head of the base, don't you think?
You would have thought so.
No, they would have been briefed on all this because, see, that's the thing that people need to understand. We left the base, okay? And this has been discussed before. The reason why we left the base on the first night and why Baran authorized us to leave the base, because there was no other reason, was not only what we were seeing from the East Gate, but the fact that they had radar confirmation through our RABCON and through Eastern radar and Heathrow did come up, where there was something on radar over the forest area that disappeared. So it wasn't a cover story why we left the base. They really did think at first that something may have went down in that area based on the radar data and the fact that we also saw the strange lights, and even some of the lighting itself that you could see the way it glowed could have been something burning. So that was the only reason why we could have left the base. There was no immediate threat to the base at that point. So what should have technically been done was simply the fact that the British police should have been notified there was something going on in that area, and the fact that the fire department should have been notified and responded also. But based on the radar data, we went out there. So yes, everybody and their uncle would have known about it by mid-morning on that day, that we were not only out base, but the British police were involved and everything else. So they played hot potato with this for different reasons, and ultimately the Air Force really wanted to get away from it, because as far as they were concerned, it was going to be pushed that it was a British matter, that we just happened to go out and take a look early on. But where it got complicated was they probably could have got away with that just on the first night, but then you had 2 more incidents that happened, including the third night where we were out there again, and that's when it became very complicated. And the Air Force didn't really want to answer a lot of questions, so they admitted the incident took place, but they handed it over to the British MOD to deal with it. So it was Harry Harris who contacted the News of the World. What was he able to offer the News of the World by way of a story?
Well, Harry Harris, Mike Sachs, and Norman Collinston, they'd been on the base and had this meeting with Holt. They'd heard the tape, and so they took the lead on negotiating with the News of the World. That was them who'd done the negotiating. Brenda and Dot weren't able to get to Manchester where the paper was then located, so Jenny agreed to act as their agent and travel from Merseyside. She attended all the meetings and kept them posted. She thought that was important, given how the chaps had sort of done the dirty on them and not told them about their meeting with Holt. So she was looking after their interest by going along to their meetings and keeping tabs on things. They had their book to protect, and so they needed to know what was happening. There were several meetings. Jenny was able to keep them all in the loop. Initially, the paper offered very little money right up to the last few days before the story aired. I've already mentioned that. The News of the World, though, they based the fees that they gave on documentation. They wanted to see some real hard evidence, and they wanted eyewitnesses, and there was few of them to offer. But in the end, there was just enough of them to up the price before the publication.
One of the things, Ronnie, I forgot to add on that last little segment about when we talked about the memo and stuff was the other interesting thing that we learned through FOIA. And when I said the Air Force and the MOD were playing hot potato, it still continues today. In the fact that when FOIA was done to the State Department, they admitted they were involved and they held documents involving the incident. But the documents, the source was from the United States Air Force. And to release those documents, the Air Force had to give permission to them to release them, which means it was an international incident. But when the Air Force was contacted based on the response from the State Department, the Air Force denied that there any documents that existed, even back in 2010. And their comment was everything that existed, the MOD held. So even to this day, they're still playing hot potato with the main course or guts of the incident itself. No one inside the United States Air Force, the Department of Defense, wants to get involved in this at all. They continue to want the British government, the MOD, to answer these questions. So I forgot to add that. So now where we're going to go next is one of the things that's been stated, and I want you to clarify why this is statement, what the statement means, is that Larry Warren has mentioned there was 25,000 pounds involved in this, so involving the Halt memo. So can you clarify basically the money part of it, what money was paid in all this, and what the figures were? It wasn't 25 pounds. Was it 25 pounds? What kind of money was exchanged in all this?
Okay, we know that the figure for the sale of the story, not for the Halt memo, the Halt memo was never sold by anyone. The Halt memo made up part of the documents that were presented to the News of the World that made up the story. The money they got for that, Harry Harris, the attorney, negotiated at the very last minute £12,000 to be split between the whole team. this 25,000 being claimed nowadays by Larry Warren, I don't know where it come from. I've asked him, and he says that Jenny Randalls told him that was 25,000. Well, I've asked Jenny Randalls, and she says there's no way she would have known if it was 25,000, because she didn't even really know what the figure was, only what she was told by Harry Harris, and that figure was £12,000. So she wouldn't have told Larry Warren it was £25,000 because she wouldn't have even really known herself. Larry says that the little team in Britain, as he refers to them, sold the News of the World Holt memo, but they didn't. It's probably not appreciated that there was an MOD source talking to the paper anyway. And the MOD certainly had the memo, as we know. I mean, they released it to Pete Bent so that he could send it on to cause, even though that must have been in a different department that Pam Titchmarsh worked in, because she was trying tirelessly to find that document for Jenny. We know this by when the MOD files were released in recent years. The story's there. She'd written to everyone trying to get the release of this Holt memo. Wasn't in her department. That could have been in another department within the MOD. We don't know. Or what Pete Bent has told cause wasn't the truth, that they had it all along.
Okay, so to clarify this, basically, for sure, there was some money negotiated through Harry Harris, but it didn't involve the memo. It involved a bunch of different documents and work that was being done that was given to the News of the World, and the figure was what, £12,500, correct?
No, £12,000.
£12,000.
Yeah.
And that was... I'm sorry, go ahead.
What that money was for, when Jenny went to the meeting with Derek Jameson, who's the editor, with Harry Harris and Mike Sachs, what they had was Jenny's letter from Pam Titchmarsh on MOD notepaper saying that, yes, something had gone on at Rendlesham, and that there was a document, and that they talked about lights, same as what the document did. That preceded the Holt memo ever coming out anyway. The date on that is before that. So they had that. They then had the Holt memo, which was sent by cause. But I'm almost certain that Harry Harris and Mike Sachs had sight of that from their meeting with Holt anyway, because he showed them, if they played them the tape and showed them the Holt memo, they were discussing the story anyway.
And Ronnie, just for clarity, why did Larry Fawcett and Barry Greenwood, representing Citizens Against UFO Secrecy cause on the East Coast of the United States, why were they able to get a copy of the Charles Holt January 13th, 1981 memo?
Because they submitted a Freedom of Information request. Simple as that. Yeah.
All right.
That they weren't the only Freedom of Information request they sent. They'd previously writ to that was Ted Cochran then, who was the base commander, and Charles Holt, and they writ back saying there was no documents existed. So that they didn't have to answer the Freedom of Information request because they had no documents, and the tape, because they said that was Colonel Holt's personal property, didn't belong to the USAF anyway. So they were telling the truth, really, but being a bit underhanded.
All right. So the next question we're going to get into a little bit about is that you have caught the fact that Larry Warren has done some interviews, or done an interview. He actually did an interview on Phenomena Radio.
Yeah.
And one of the things that he said was that he stated that he had spoken to Keith Beebe only very briefly for 5 minutes. And you wanted to go into the fact of that statement is that it was much longer than 5 minutes. So that's basically the question. He has now stated that he only briefly spoke to Keith Beebe for 5 minutes, and you want to expand on that. So go ahead.
Yeah, well, if you cast your mind back, John, to that Phenomenon radio show when he was on, I mean, I don't know how many times he said, I want to get to the News of the World, I want to get to the News of the World, and you kept said, yeah, okay, we'll get to that eventually. And when he did get to the News of the World, he says, you're going to love this. I never spoke to the News of the World. I couldn't believe it. I mean, it's in his own book. It's in Left at Eastgate that he spoke to the News of the World.
Right, that's where we started the introduction, right from the pages 99 to 100.
But not only in one place, it's in there in half a dozen places. You know, it clearly says that. But I was looking back on some old interviews on YouTube, and I found an interview where he was talking at a conference, and this was before Left at Eastgate even come out. And he said in that one as well, I never spoke to the News of the World. So that's not a new revelation. He said that before the Left at Eastgate come out, and then when Left at Eastgate come out, over about half a dozen pages, he's talking about speaking to Keith Beebe and the News of the World. Work that out. It just don't make sense.
Right.
He said he never spoke to the News of the World. That's not true, you know.
Okay.
He said he spoke to him briefly, and they wanted his real name, and he said he wouldn't give an interview until others come forward first. So that's not a whistleblower going to come forward after someone else speaks first. I thought a whistleblower is someone who comes out and says it, takes the bull by the horns.
And Ronnie, I'm puzzled that we're talking in June of 2016. This is 33 years later after the phenomena. The book Left at Eastgate speaks for itself. It is printed in hard paper, and pages 99 to 100 are where Larry Warren is writing himself about the people he was talking to before October 2nd, 1983, and specifically talks about the fact that he talked with Beebe and that he was Art Wallace. All of that is stated. So can you help me and the Phenomenon Radio audience understand when and why did Larry Warren recently start denying that he ever spoke to News of the World Beebe?
I don't know exactly when, Linda. I mean, what really raised my eyebrows was the Phenomenon Radio show, when he was so adamant that he never spoke to the News of the World. But then in recent interviews, a lot of things on Larry Warren's story are changed. You know, you need to keep up to it to really understand it. One minute he's saying that the green light come down on the Shadow's head, and he passed out and he woke up in his bunk. Then the next minute he's telling in another interview that he got tapped on the shoulder and he walked back to the staging post. Oh, he saw John there, couldn't miss John. And then after the most recent show that they done, which was the UFOs Declassified Red Alert, that's where John said, I think for the first time for me anyway, said that he'd had 14 hours missing time. And when Adrian come on Phenomenon and said, do you know, I can't remember after that point, all of a sudden Larry Warren says, well, no, I can't remember after that. That's gone from one to the other to back again. You know, the story is so muddled.
And I think it's really important, don't you, to stress that the phenomena that occurred after midnight between December 26th and December 28th, 1980, involved perhaps in that third night as many as 36 people, and then John and Jim and Ed Kavansak, and the middle night that we know involved Bonnie Tamplin and Robert Ball and Colonel Halt and others. So there's a lot of people who have already spoken on the record to me in recorded phone interviews over the last decade or so. They deserve the respect that they are describing real phenomena that occurred at RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge, December 26 to 28, 1980, and that we need to keep stressing that one person's voice, now coming all the way 33 years later, trying to change a story that he himself put in a 1997 published book, must be looked at through the lens of a recent change for reasons unknown.
Yeah, that certainly don't help, do it? I mean, most of the people I've spoke to, and there's a few witnesses that haven't come forward who I speak to regular, they all have problems with their memories. They can remember the most of it, but the reason they haven't come forward is because what they're seeing happening on social media and at conferences where a story is being put out that is changing all the while, and things that weren't true are being said. Until that stops, I can't see this going any further. I can't.
Right. I understand. So let's move on and one of the things that happened towards the end before the News of the World hit was the fact that we, and you talked a little bit about earlier how the fee went up from 5 to 12. You want to go a little bit into some of the other tabloids may have tried to get into it and what went on with that?
Yeah, well, I don't think even the girls or anyone would have known this, but the day before the News of the World went to press, they got a tip off from the Daily Mirror, and the Daily Mirror had got hold of Jenny Randall's phone number, and they pestered the life out of her for the story. Now, they didn't know that Jenny was involved with the News of the World story, but she was like the go-to woman when it come to you. She was something to do with MUFON once. I think she was the director of investigation, something like that was her title, and she could have easily sold the story and copped a lot if she'd have wanted to. No one would have known. I mean, they'd have kept her name out of it. She'd have given the story, but she didn't. So yeah, they really tried to offer her more money to give an interview, more money than what the News of the World had on offer. That was just the day before it broke. Yeah, that's it.
Do you wonder maybe because it came up earlier that maybe Harry Harris leaked something to them just to force the News of the World to jump the make the fee go up a little even higher? Could that be possible?
Sorry, so Harry Harris leaked the story?
Well, I mean, at the very end, because he wasn't, there was not enough money being offered, and his feelings were that maybe even that somehow, how did the Mirror, these guys find out about it? Do you know?
Yeah, that was someone who was in the typesetting room at the News of the World. I mean, that industry is fraught with corruption. You know, okay. Keith Beebe had his phone tapped. He spoke about that to Brenda back in the day. When they wrote on them, because see, Larry Warren says they got this money for the Holt memo. They didn't. Brenda spent over a week, or about a week, with Keith Beebe, day and night, you know, taking him to places, introducing him to people, getting him interviews, telling him the story. You know, that weren't just about a document. I think it played a part, but only a small part. While they were out, Keith Beebe would stop and use a public telephone because he knew that his phone at home and the officers, they were being bugged all the while. I mean, that's how Fleet Street worked. I mean, that was actually the downfall of the News of the World, because they had hacked into mobile phones, hadn't they? That's why the News of the World finished in the end, because it was proven.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
And basically, I think we covered this earlier, but you can readdress the fact that the girls made very little money off of this. And the fact was that basically what they were paid for this barely covered or did cover some of their expenses.
Yeah, no, they just about... Jenny spent her money, what she got, on a plane ticket to go to the States to do research for Sky Crash. Dot paid off part of her phone bill. Heaven knows how much it was. I know it was over £1,000. In the course of her investigations, Brenda had used up 3 cars, and her car had then clapped out and she went and bought another motor car. So there was no profit in it for anyone. You know, that was what they got, just about smoothed over the bad times that they were what they were feeling. So.
And so the current effort by Larry Warren to bring money into this, to deny that he ever talked to Beebe at News of the World, all of this is an effort to pull the rug out from under all of the legitimate phenomena that we know really happened.
I believe that's that, and I also believe that's to write the girls out of the story. I mean, they weren't interviewed for his book, left at Eastgate, were they? I mean, the 3 principal investigators on the case, you'd think they'd get a chapter to themselves.
That's true. I mean, they were all working hand in hand on this. Why wasn't that covered at some point?
Listen, John, that's a fact. Jenny Randall's written articles that were sent to the United States, and she wrote in UFO magazines, and she shared them. All right, they might not have had a massive coverage, but long before Larry Warren come forward. I mean, they wrote an article in the Explained magazine. Jenny wrote several articles in the Flying Saucer Review. The story, if you want to look at it, was way out a year possibly before the Omni article ever come out, and that's the Omni article that Larry Warren saw, that he read and thought, that's all coming out, and that's when he first got involved.
Okay. Now, Jenny Randall's herself, what role did she play with the News of the World, and and the girls, and exactly how did she get involved, and and how did it evolve, and what part did she play in all of this?
Okay, so Jenny's involvement with the News of the World, that was mostly over the phone, over across 2 or 3 weeks. She attended the meetings in Manchester when the contract was first discussed. She had to convince the News of the World that there was a story. They weren't just going to give a story on hearsay or an anonymous airman from the States. They wanted hard evidence. And before they dispatched Keith Beebe, they wanted to see something. So at one of those meetings, Jenny outlined the importance of the case, the evidence they had from the MOD as to its status within the UK government. They'd wanted some sign that our government had taken the story seriously to legitimise the matter in front of the British public. So that's what Jenny done. She showed them the letter that she'd got from Pam Titchmarsh, and that more or less swayed her. And that along with the whole memo made the editor's eyes pop out. There's something with MOD and USAF on it saying that something really did happen, so they knew there was a story there. Jenny was able to report back to Dot and Brenda what sort of negotiations, how they were going. The Harry Harris, Mike Saxon, Norman Collinsons, they didn't really trust them, so she had to keep an eye on them. And they'd done the media negotiations before. Jenny hadn't been involved in any of those deals. They were all done in secret. They tended to do all their negotiations in secret. And Jenny tells me often the first she ever knew about a story, even though she was involved with their UFO group, was when she read about it in the paper. And once the MOD documents that Jenny gave to the News of the World editor was several correspondences that Jenny had been writing to Pam Titchmarsh for quite some time. And so she was able to show them all, all the documentations that she'd got.
Okay. Now, one of the things I'm curious about, because before we go into what Brenda Butler's involvement was, and then we're going to play an interview you did with her, was we've talked about the money, factor, and how it ended up being 12,000 pounds. Do you believe that at any point in time anyone else was offered some money for their story? Has there been talk about that? Whether or not they actually took it or not is another different story. But was there a possibility that Harry Harris was trying to offer some money for somebody else to talk about what they knew and what was going on?
Yep, I have heard that. And I think it's best we leave that until the interview with Brenda. And we talk about it in there, so...
Okay, good. So then let's go a little bit into Brenda Butler's involvement on it, and then after we do that, we'll probably be taking a short break and then playing Brenda's interview.
Yeah, okay then.
What, you want to go ahead and talk a little bit about Brenda's involvement before we do the interview?
Yeah, you can do if you want to.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so Brenda's sitting at home and the phone goes, and that's Keith Beebe on the phone. And he's the top reporter at the time of the News of the World. His head had given him the task of investigating the Rendlesham Forest incident of the Christmas period in 1980. He needed Brenda. He needed her help because, he needed to get on the base. He needed to speak to Charles Holt. He needed to contact numbers. And Brenda had been there from the get-go, hadn't she? She'd been investigating this, so... he asked her would she help him, and he said yes, she would. The News of the World had learnt from the incident from Harry Harris and Norman Collinson and Jenny Randalls. They'd been to see the News of the World. Now they told Keith Beebe he needed to get down to Suffolk and investigate.
Okay, and so they were going to investigate. Because we've got a couple minutes before we go to the break.
Yeah.
The three ladies worked hand in hand together through all of this. So why don't you summarize, before we go to break, the three ladies' involvement, what little money they did gain from it, before we go to break, and then we come back with Brenda's interview.
Okay, so Brenda was the first to hear about it, and she heard about it from one of the airmen on the base on a New Year's party. He told her that something had gone down. A couple of days later, I think she contacted Dot Street, who was a UFO investigator. she was working for MUFON as their like area rep person, and she needed some help with the investigation. So that got Dot involved. Jenny didn't get involved in quite a while later. When they realised that was too much for them all to handle. Well, I think Dot really pushed Jenny on to Brenda. I think Brenda would have been happy just to carry on the way they were, but then Jenny got involved. That's it really. That's how it all started. Brenda used to go take interviews. Dot was brilliant at getting to talk to her. She was the talker. Brenda was the writer. Dot could get onto the base no problem, and she spent hours and hours talking away and trying to get information. Jenny was like the official person behind it all, and she was the one who talked them into that they really needed to write this book, Sky Crash.
Okay, so basically we had two entities working behind the scenes at the time. The girls found out about the story, they were working on it, and Harry Harris somehow, and I don't know if we ever establish how Harry Harris first found out about it, but he found out about it and was working with getting the story in the News of the World. And at that point, because even though they were working on a book to put out, they felt it was important that they at least had some say in what came out in the News of the World, just on the fact that they didn't want to get the story from the get-go, that it would be not true what they put out in the News of the World, which would ruin the book.
Yeah, that's right. So we had two teams. We had Brenda, Dot, and Jenny later working in Woodbridge. And then we had Harry Harris, Mike Sachs, Norman Collinson, and Jenny Randalls was part of their team. I should imagine that was probably Jenny who got Harry Harris involved in the first place by telling him that something had gone off. I'm not 100% certain on that, but I can't see how else he would have known. So they worked hand in hand a bit, the two teams, but they didn't trust each other. And there was a lot of conversations going backwards, forwards. Oh, don't tell Harry Harris I told you this. And Harry Harris would say, don't tell Mike Sachs I told you this. And the same with Dot and Brenda. So they were getting the same information. They were sharing it, but they weren't giving anything away.
I see. So it kind of started early on, even with the investigators. So on that note, we'll do a break.
Okay, nurse, let's get this man to the ER stat.
Right away, doctor.
We see this every day. Heart attack or angina pain due to blocked and clogged arteries. Chelation can remove obstructions or blockages from arteries and help avoid painful and expensive surgery. Now there's Angioprim. It's a liquid oral chelation product that you take with juice. You start to feel the results fast. Angioprim increases blood flow all over the body, and that means more energy and strength to take on the day with less aches and pains. 60 years of research has gone into chelation, and Angioprim is the result. A safe and easy way to unblock your veins and arteries from buildup that slow circulation.
Paging Dr. Jones. Please report to the emergency room right away.
Log on now for a special radio offer from Angioprim. That's angioprim.com/radio. ANGIOPRIM. Angioprim.com/radio or call 877-882-7221. That's 877-882-7221.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7 with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
If your home has hard water and it's leaving white spots, then it's likely that limescale is clogging your pipes. Limescale can cost hundreds of dollars a year in wasted energy and early appliance breakdown. HydroCare systems available at Wave Home Solutions prevent and remove limescale with just a simple filter change every 3 years. There are no salts, chemicals, or magnetic coils. Satisfaction guaranteed. For more information, just go to bestwater123.com. That's bestwater123.com.
Your UFO paranormal powerhouse of live alternative talk radio. KGRA, The Planet.
You're listening to KGRA DB, the Global Radio Alliance, Van Buren, Arkansas, Sarasota, Florida. As we begin Hour 2 with John Burroughs and Linda Moulton Howe, we first have to get to the news. From earthfiles.com, here's senior reporter and editor Linda Moulton Howe.
This past week, at the end of June 2016, scientists with NASA's New Horizons spacecraft mission to Pluto released new images of the dwarf planet that's at the edge of our solar system with this surprising headline: Pluto could have a liquid ocean. Newly released photographs show deep ice cracks in Pluto regions that indicate there has been global expansion, and the only process that could do that is slow freezing of a subsurface ocean, even though until now everyone, including scientists, thought Pluto was a completely frozen ball of ice. Now scientists think there might have been enough heat-producing radioactive elements within Pluto's rocky core to melt part of the planet's ice shell. That melting water would refreeze and expand and create the cracks of tectonics on the surface. That's exactly what New Horizon images show. But if Pluto once had a dynamic ocean a billion years ago or so, what happened to it? Noah Hammond, a graduate student in Brown University's Department of Earth, Environmental, and Planetary Sciences, who has been studying the giant tectonic features that run for hundreds of miles on parts of the Pluto surface and as deep as about 2 miles, says, quote, "We don't see the things on the surface that we would expect if there had been a global contraction of Pluto going to all ice. So we conclude that Pluto's ocean has not completely frozen," close quote. But there still is a lot of ice on Pluto. Researchers think that the ice shell surrounding liquid water is perhaps 186 miles thick. If the ice shell were any thinner, the ocean might have frozen a long time ago. Hammond explains, quote, "Those exotic ices are actually good insulators. They may be helping Pluto from losing more of its heat to space. And that is amazing to me. The possibility that you could have vast liquid water ocean habitats so far from the sun on Pluto, and that the same could also be possible on other Kuiper Belt objects as well, far beyond Pluto, well, that is absolutely incredible," close quote. This is Linda Moulton Howe. Please stay tuned to Earth Files news updates on KGRA Radio and visit every day my science, environment, and real X-Files news website, earthfiles.com. For more on breaking stories about our universe, this solar system, and the planet we live on.
And that's the news, brought to you by earthfiles.com. Now, back to the program. And that's the news, brought to you by earthfiles.com.
Hello, Brenda, and welcome back to Phenomenon Radio. In the previous show, we learnt from Jenny how the Holt memo got released from the cores in America through Larry Fawcett. What happened exactly when Dot received the Holt memo? What was the first thing you can remember you done?
Well, the first thing I can remember about Dot receiving that is she phoned me up and she said, "You'll never guess what I've received in the post today, Brenda." And I said, "What's that then, Dot?" And she says, "Well, I've got the Holt memo here." And I said, "Well, what do you mean the Holt memo?" And she says, "Well, I've received it in the post from Larry Fawcett." And she was really, really excited about it. And she says, come on up. She said, "I'll show it to you." And I said, "Okay then." And I went up to Dot's. It looked genuine enough, but I don't know, we both had our suspicions at the time whether it was or whether it weren't. So the next thing we planned was to go and ask Moreland and see Moreland, and then see Colonel Holt.
So you went to Moulton first and wanted to show him the memo and ask could he verify if that was genuine?
Yes, and he told us to go and see Colonel Holt, because he said that Colonel Holt would say whether it was genuine or not. So then he made arrangements for us to go over to see Colonel Holt. So we went over to Colonel Holt's office, and Doc just plonked it down in front of him and said, "Look, I think this belonged to you. It's your memo." And he said, "Oh, my God, how did you get that? How did you get that? He said, you shouldn't have got that. It should have never ever been released. And he had a look at it, and we said, well, is it genuine then? And he said, well, yes, that's my signature on it.
Blimey, so who was there? Just you and Dot, or was Jenny there as well?
No, just Dot and myself.
Yeah. And so from there, what did you do next?
Well, then Dot got in touch with Jenny. She didn't mention the whole memo, but we all went up to the Befora meeting that they had up there, and Harry Harris was there too, and Dot had told Harry about the whole memo. Dot went in because she was a Befora member, but Chris came with us, and Chris and I had to stand outside until Jenny asked all the members there if it was all right if Chris and I joined them. And we were told we could join them, so we went in. And anyway, that came up about the Rendlesham case, and Dot and myself doing investigations and everything. And everybody was just po-hoing it and everything, you know, and they said they didn't believe it, and that was a load of rubbish. And then Harry Harris said, well, you wait to see what Dot has got then. And Dot went up to Jenny and plonked it in front of her. And Jenny had a look at it, and her face was a picture. And then she passed it round to everybody, and they just couldn't believe it. And they kept saying, is it genuine? Is it genuine? You know, and that was basically when they started taking it seriously. Was that the full Befora meeting, or was this a committee afterwards? No, that was everybody who was at the Befora meeting. Yeah. Who was there. Yeah, there was Jenny and, well, the people who normally, I suppose, meet there. And so were the people who'd done the investigation for the Scufora, were they there? Yes, they were. Because they sort of damned it, didn't they? That's right, yes. So what was their reaction when they saw that it was genuine? Didn't really say anything. They looked at it and they had their doubts whether it was genuine or whether it wasn't. So even you weren't certain? No, because you'd seen Holt, so Holt had told you that was genuine. Yeah, but, I mean, there'd been so many documents coming out and passed around, which in later years, Ralph Noyes and Lord Hill Norton had told us a lot of the documents that come out are all faked anyway. Yeah, I've seen some talk about aliens with claw-like hands. So were the press involved with that meeting? No. That was closed. That was a closed meeting. I bet they soon got to hear about it then. Yes, they did. Yeah. Do you think they were tipped off? Oh yeah, I think somebody at the meeting definitely told them. I mean, I can't prove Jenny did, but I mean Harry Harris might have done. Somebody there obviously did. Yeah, because Harry Harris and his team from Manchester, they've been selling UFO stories to the press. They've done quite a few, haven't they? They've been selling them. Yeah. So possibly he tipped them off. So when was the first thing you heard from the News of the World? How did that come about? Keith Beebe phoned me up and to say he was coming down to Woodbridge on the 21st of September. Yeah. And could I meet with him? Because he was coming to investigate the case of the UFO. December 80. Right, so prior to that, had Jenny had any contact with the News of the World and Harry Harris? Did they go see the News of the World? I've got a letter from the News of the World editor, because there was a bit of a confusion about this, and on there the editor says Jenny and Mike Sachs and Harry Harris went to see them and signed contracts and that for the story to come out in the News of the World. Right, so they had done, because I've got some of Jenny's notes from her diary that she sent in an email, and I think I can remember she said in there that she'd been down and they were interested in knowing if she had any MOD documents or anything to confirm that what was said in the Holt document was true, so that's interesting. So Keith came down on the 21st. Yes. And met up with you? He met up with me at the Crown Hotel at Framlingham at 9 p.m. in the bar. Yeah. And we wanted to talk about things and talk over the case and what we'd got so far and what Dot and I had been up to and that. So, so we went into another part of the room of the hotel and we talked it over. And then I arranged for him to pick me up at 10 a.m. and Dot at 11 a.m. the next day on the 22nd. Right, so he sort of like he went there just for the day. He'd set up camp there. Oh yeah, he was here for quite a long time. Yeah. Yeah. So what happened the next day when he picked you up in the morning? Well, we went to Wilford Bridge for coffee. And then we went on to Woodbridge Base to see Sitso. He was on holiday. He was a major witness and he worked in the mess hall. Right. Yeah. And we'd been told about him. And after that, anyway, we went to the forestry office. Then we went to see Mr. Bose because we were going round and round people and we weren't getting anywhere. So then we went to see Mr. Booth, the gamekeeper, and then to see Frank Brown, the farmer. We didn't get very much info at all, so then we went down to see Holt. He wasn't in, so we went and had lunch, and after we went to see Captain Kathleen McCullen and Don Morland.
Yeah, was that Kathleen McCullen? Was she
was
based
PR,
Yeah, right.
She was the PR officer. I went to see Don Morland, but he only told him the same as what he had told myself and Dot. That the men had just seen lights and that, and nothing basically had happened.
When you'd done your investigations and went and asked him if anything had happened, so he'd said the same story then?
Yes.
Nothing new?
Then we went to see Jerry Harris, and he wasn't in, so we went to see Andrew Sheepshanks.
Yeah, who was Jerry Harris then? Was he a British witness?
Yeah, he had a garage, a very small garage, where he used to repair cars for the base.
Oh, right.
And his garage was right opposite the runway of Bentwaters, so it more or less looked over Bentwaters. And he saw the lights at night and heard all the noise and everything and going on in the base and everything, and he wondered what was happening. But he saw some lights go over the forest and come down, wondered what was happening. The next day, when somebody came into the garage, he asked him, he said, what was going on at the base last night. He said all this noise and lights and everything, and the guy said, he said, I can't tell you that. He said, if I tell you that, I'll have to shoot you because it's top secret. So then we went to see Andrew Sheepshanks, and Keith spoke to Captain Sheepshanks, and he said we should have phoned and made an appointment, so he wouldn't really talk to us.
Captain Sheepshanks, is he the landowner chap?
He wasn't landowner, not around Rendlesham.
Yeah.
Captain Sheepshanks was the father of Andrew Sheepshanks, who phoned Dot up and said that he saw something come over the top of his house, like a silver missile thing come over the top of his house and went over into the forest.
And then when Dot went to see him, did he deny it then, or Captain Sheepshanks said that Andrew didn't see anything?
Well, we went to when Dot and I called there, and we went to see Andrew Sheepshanks, and we didn't get really a chance to speak to him because Captain Sheepshanks come out and wouldn't allow us to talk to him. He said he didn't see anything. What are you talking about? And Dot said what he had said, but he wouldn't allow us. He told us more or less to get off his land, otherwise he'd call the police. And then we went back again at a later date. And his secretary come out and said, I don't think you should be here, you better go. And she said, for Captain see you, and he will call the police. So we tried to get in touch with Andrew Sheepshanks again, but we couldn't. He wouldn't talk to us.
So that was a dead end then.
Yeah.
So I was looking at your journal, and at 9:45, talked to Keith about the case, then went to his hotel room, and he typed a letter to Holt and gave it to me to read. What was in that letter then, Brenda?
That was just about, Keith said, could he see him because he wanted to interview him.
Oh, right.
And could he sort of like set up a meeting with him? So basically that's all what it really said, is that just Keith was interested in interviewing him.
Yes, what happened next on that day then?
Well, he then made a phone call to Larry Fawcett in the States, and he wasn't there. And he had to phone back later, and he phoned back at 11:30 p.m. and he spoke to Fawcett, and Fawcett just told him basically what he knew, what he'd heard, from the guys and everything, and basically that was just about a UFO or a craft landing down in the forest and came down. And I think at the time that Keith mentioned Art Wallace, Art Wallace, and Fawcett didn't really say anything about him. He said, oh yes, I've spoken to him, and that was about all he did say about that.
Yeah, because he'd sent an interview he'd done with Art Wallace to Dot, hadn't he? Was it sent to Dot?
Yes, I think it might have been. Yeah.
Yeah, to help with their investigations.
Yeah.
Or it could have been Jenny. Anyway, so now we've gone Friday the 23rd of September.
Yeah, Keith came to pick me up at 10 o'clock, and we went to drop a letter into Holt at 10:45. He wasn't in, so we went to the Tall Chimneys near the forestry office at 11 a.m. And we also went to see Vincent Thurkettle.
What's the Tall Chimneys? Is that...
That's the name of the houses down there. They're like great big flats.
Yeah.
And everything, so... that's what they're called, the Tall Chimneys.
And Vince Thurkettle, he's the chap who...
Yeah.
We said it was rabbit scrapings. What do you have to say?
and we didn't see him because he weren't there.
Oh, right, yeah.
So then we went to see Sheepshanks at 11:45, and he wasn't there. He
So
was
no
in
one was in?
No, so then we went to Ipswich to pick up the photographer, and then we went to Wilford Bridge to have lunch, went to the East Gate and took some photos, then back to see Holt. He still wasn't there, so we went to take some photos on the site, and Keith and Stuart, the photographer, had to make some phone calls. Keith had to go and see Holt at 5 p.m. He'd made arrangements to see Holt at 5 p.m, just him. So myself, Stuart and Dot went to the site to take photo shoots.
Mm-hmm.
Then we went back to meet Keith on base, then went to Wilford Bridge. Stuart then left to go home. And Keith brought me and Dot back to mine, making arrangements to meet him again at 8:30 p.m. in the bar of his hotel.
Right, so Keith went to see Holt on his own. Did he say why he went on his own? Was there a reason he didn't want to take you with him?
Holt said that he just wanted Keith. He didn't want us to go. And on that meeting, Keith said that Holt said that he would talk if he paid £25,000.
Sorry, say that again.
Holt wanted £25,000 for his story.
Off Keith Beebe?
Well, off the News of the World.
Did you hear him say that?
No, Keith told us this.
Keith told you that?
Yeah, Keith told us this.
Anyway,
Keith phoned up the News of the World and they wouldn't come up with, I think they offered him 5,000 and he said no, he wanted 25,000, so the deal wasn't done.
So what was Holt going to give him then that he didn't already have? Because, no, he hadn't spoken to Art Wallace at that time, had he? This was before then. I wonder what Holt had that he thinks was worth £25,000.
Well, he wanted the money to send his daughter to university over in the States. That's what Holt wanted the money for.
And that's what Keith told you?
Yes. Well, Holt told Dot and I that at one stage anyway.
Wow, he would have got in serious trouble if he'd have got found out, I would have thought.
I mean, the News of the World wouldn't give it to him anyway. But I think he was just going to tell him a rubbishy story. I don't think that he was going to tell him the truth, obviously.
No, maybe he was going to have a Colonel Holt game with them and get some money out of them. I wonder if that's why Conrad and Moulton contacted the Omni magazine. Because I've never been able to work out why would they contact the Omni magazine and give a story if they were trying to contain the story, unless they wanted to beat someone else at their own game.
I thought that was the Omni magazine that phoned them up, not them phoning up the Omni. I thought that was the Omni because the Omni phoned us all up, didn't they? And Johnny.
Yeah, but they didn't have to give them a story, did they?
No.
I mean, if they were going to contain it, surely they would have just said nothing to say. Nothing happened, or there was just a few lights. Well, I can't understand why they'd want to give a story.
Yeah, because Keith left at 3 p.m. on the 24th.
Yeah.
Then he came down again on the 28th, and at 4:45 he went to his hotel room and phoned up Ted Conrad at 6 p.m. No luck again. He was away, and he had to phone back again on Thursday, Washington DC. So we're going up to Dots tonight to see if we could get in touch with Larry Fawcett and Art Wallace, because Keith wanted to talk to them. So Keith phoned up General Gordon Williams, and he admitted to Holt's letter, said Holt's letter would not be a hoax. Keith had to phone him again later.
Hang on a minute. Gordon Williams said that he admitted to Holt's letter.
Yeah.
And yet he's gone on the record saying he knew nothing about Holt's letter. And if he had known about it, I think he says in an interview, that one slipped under the net.
No, he knew about it because...
Well, he obviously knew about it.
Yeah,
he's admitted.
Keith spoke to him.
Right.
And he said Holt's letter would not be a hoax, and he asked Keith to phone him back again later. But when Keith did phone him up, Williams weren't there. He'd left to go on holiday. And
that sounds like they were getting a real runaround. They obviously didn't want the News of the World down there at all, did they?
And after this, we went down to Bentwaters to see if we could get in touch with Holt. He was not in, so we hung around. Holt still didn't come in. We then left to go up to Dots. As we were there early, we went for a drink, then back to Dots. Dot played us a tape of Art Wallace. Keith then phoned him up, talked to him for 1 hour. Art gave Keith all the details of what happened that night. It is all on tape. Dot taped it. We left Dots at 1 a.m. to come home. Keith was not impressed as Art Wallace kept changing his story so many times. He could not remember who was there or who was with him. This
is Art Wallace couldn't remember. So this is where Keith made the phone call to Art Wallace.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the tape where Dot
introduces
Keith to Art Wallace, and he's on the phone for an hour.
Yes.
So that's that. So Keith wasn't that impressed. So on Thursday, the 29th of September, he come and pick you up.
Yeah, 12:30. We made some phone calls. Well, he made some phone calls from mine. Then we left to go and see Holt. Holt told him to phone him back at 7 p.m. Then he would talk to him after he had been in touch with his legal people on base. We left there and Keith found a telephone box to report things back to his editor. We then drove back to mine. Keith phoned up Washington DC to see if he could contact Ted Conrad. He was told to phone back at 10 p.m. Then Ted Conrad could be contacted. Keith then phoned Holt. He wouldn't say anything as he was too scared for his job. So we will try him again tomorrow night. We had dinner at 7:30, sat and talked over the last few days. Keith then took me home, went back to his hotel room to phone up Conrad. 9:30 p.m, Harry Harris phoned up, went on about the News of the World paper only offering £5,000 and said he wasn't going to accept her. Also thought Dot was at mine. Harry, upset at the figure, said he would talk to the editor again.
So Harry was doing a negotiating. I think £5,000 was the going rate for a story in them days, wasn't it? And he obviously Harry thought the story was worth a lot more than that. Well, I thought that was worth a lot more than that.
Yeah.
And I think the correspondence from Jenny I've had, she's told me that was the amount what was going to get paid right up till the last couple of days, and then a figure of £12,000 was mentioned, and she's told me that was split 6 ways. You, Dot, Harry Harris, Mike Sachs, Jenny Randalls, and then there was a police detective inspector.
That's right.
Don't know if we should mention his name.
Maybe not.
Maybe not. And that payment had to be made unofficial or under the counter because of his circumstances. Well, the circumstance could be that he was a high up rank in the Greater Manchester Police Force, or it could have been something else. We don't really know, do we? But all seem a little bit cloak and dagger, don't it?
All I know is that Dot and I got paid $1,500 each from that News of the World deal.
Mm-hmm.
I know that for a fact. And that was £3,000. And
for the two of you?
For the two of us, that was $1,500 each.
Yeah.
And Harry, Mike, Jenny, and I didn't know about the other bloke until later on, they got the rest, but then we heard they got paid £25,000. And Dot and I still only got $1,500 out of that each. And, we've been told 2 or 3 times that they got paid £25,000.
Yeah, well, I asked Jenny outright, and she said no. She had no way of knowing what the others got paid, but I think she spoke something a little over what you got, but she had some meetings that she had to attend, what had to come out of that on your behalf because she lived nearer to where the meeting places were. I think she talked about £2,000, something like that, and that funded her airfare to America. Dot paid her phone bill. You replaced your car, didn't you?
Yeah, I replaced my car. Yeah, I got through 3 cars. Dot's got through goodness knows how many phone bills.
Yeah, I know she's talked about phone bills of £1,000. But let's get this straight, Brenda. That money wasn't for the Holt document, which is being bounded around constantly, that you got that, whatever money you got wasn't for the Holt document. That was for the work that you'd put in, as we've just seen going through these journals. How long was Keith down there for?
Keith went back on the 30th of September.
So how many days was it? A week?
Yeah, about
a week.
Yeah, about a week, 10 days all told.
And Jenny has told me that that was for the story, that weren't for the one document, because she provided some documents that were quite interesting as well, MOD documents, her letter from Pam Titchmarsh. So that the whole document played a part of it because they printed it in the paper. But the money wasn't for... You didn't sell the Holt document.
We did not sell the Holt document. That money was purely for us talking to the News of the World.
And showing Keith around and introducing them to people and getting them on the base.
Yes.
Well, I think that's... is there anything else we need to discuss at this moment? Regarding Keith Beebe, is there anything else you can tell us about him?
No, I told you about the whole asking for £25,000.
How did
send his daughter back to university.
Did he just, when he came out of the meeting, did he just say Holt has asked for £25,000?
Well, no, Keith and I met up actually, and we sort of kept it sort of like between ourselves and everything when we used to meet. And he just told me, and I said to him, "Can you divulge what you and Holt talk about?" And he said, "I know I can trust you, and yes, I can." And he told me then that Holt, he said, asked for £25,000 for the story as he wanted to send his daughter to university back in the States. He said he phoned up the News of the World and they refused. They said the most they could pay him was £5,000 for the story if they could prove that was true.
I'm just gobsmacked about that. But then he says earlier in the journal, when Keith spoke to him, he said he had to check with his
legal team.
His legal team?
He was going to check with his legal team to see if he could tell them the whole story, the true story. And they obviously told him no. But the thing is, I told Keith right from the start that Holt was a hoaxer. His son had told us that. And he loved hoaxing people and loved playing jokes on people. And I told Keith right from the start that's what would happen.
So do you think Holt was serious when he asked for that? Or do you think
I don't.
No, I think he was just pulling his leg down.
I think he was pulling Keith's leg, yeah. Trying it on. I really do. But Keith spoke to Tony and James, a couple of guys on base who worked on base, on the 25th of November. And they said they had seen over the base a big green light travelling very fast, but it wasn't an aeroplane. So that was more or less what Gordon Leverett saw, weren't it, coming over there in December 1980.
And this is 3 years after, similar sort of thing.
Yeah, this is when he spoke to them. That's what they said they saw. Yeah.
That's really interesting. So I think we've come some way tonight, and we've proved that Larry Warren did speak to the News of the World. Well, we've got the tape so we can prove.
Well, he did, Ronnie, because I was up Dot's with Keith, with Dot, and she taped all of her phone calls. She taped Burroughs, Peniston, Bustinza, whoever she talked to, Larry's mum, Larry's sister. She'd got all the tapes somewhere of what they said. And Keith spoke to Larry. I mean, there's no denying it. You know, you've got the tape.
Why do you think he's saying that? I mean, first of all, he said on Phenomenon Radio, when he came on there with Peter Robbins, and I can't understand why Peter didn't correct him. He said, "I never spoke to the News of the World." Then later in the interview, he said, "Well, I did speak to the News of the World, but only for 5 minutes, and only to..." I've got the soundbite somewhere. Only to confirm... They only want to know they want to know what my name was, and I wouldn't tell them who it was. And he says he think he slipped up 3 times. But you've listened to the tape, Brenda. There's nowhere in that interview does Keith say to Larry, "What, I want to know your name." In fact, he says the opposite. He says he quite understands the difficulties. I think I've got it here somewhere. He understands the difficulties that he's under, and he's not interested in any way in what his name is. Let me just find it. This is Keith Beebe. He says, "Good, now I will make it absolutely straight from the start. I quite understand the pressures you will feel yourself under, and I fully appreciate your position. I've spoken to Larry," meaning Larry Fawcett, "now about 4 times. 3 or 4 times, and they haven't told me who you are. In fact, I'm not all that interested, and he hasn't told me, and I don't know. I'm not interested." And then Larry Warren goes, "It's not that, sir. I have a friend in this, and he has disappeared off the face of the earth." But there you go. I mean, this isn't a 5-minute conversation. This is 31 pages that lasted an hour.
That was an hour.
Yeah.
Because I sat there, and actually I wrote a lot of the stuff down, but on Keith's part, which I wrote down, Keith was going, I see, yes, yes, okay, I see.
Yes.
Because I wrote a lot of the pages down what he was saying.
Yeah, I heard you speaking to someone in the background. Was Chris Pennington there? Because I could hear you speaking to a man, and was that Keith you were speaking to?
That might have been Keith I was speaking to.
Yeah, right.
Or that might have been when Keith was talking to Larry. That could have been Chris.
Yeah. Well, I've looked at everything what was said in that conversation with Larry and Keith Beebe, and everything was in the News of the World where Larry says distorted beyond belief. There's things that he said that comes from that. I don't understand how Larry can turn around and say that he never spoke to the News of the World, or he only spoke to him in 5 minutes. I mean, look at Left at Eastgate, the book that Pete Robbins and Larry Warren, in page 100, and I'll quote from the book, "The end of September led to more meetings with Fawcett. He tape recorded my account again, and when I asked him why, he said he'd lost the first one. Dot Street called me from England again, but I remained guarded. Also calling from the UK that week was Keith Beebe, a reporter with the News of the World, a tabloid with the largest circulation in Britain. Sunday night, 2nd of October, Greenwood called to say News of the World had broken the story in England. Their front page headline read, UFO lands in Suffolk and that's official. I was shocked. I don't understand why he was shocked when he'd just spent an hour speaking to the reporter. Barry had found some copies of the paper in Boston and was sending one to me. The story included a copy of the Holt document and statements by Art. Page 101, Left at Eastgate. The story included a copy of the Holt document and statements by Art Wallace, distorted beyond belief. There was also a copy of my drawing of the craft and a large photo of Gordon Williams. He had verified the landing, but stated that he himself was not involved. Coverage continued on to the next page and included a picture of Fawcett along with the supporting statements. That was something I meant to mention, Brenda. The money that you received weren't just for that. That was for like 2 weeks. There was other articles what came out as well.
Oh, yes, there was.
Yeah, so
yes,
it weren't just for it weren't for a document, and it weren't for that 2nd of October story. That was for the 9th and
that's right.
Right, page 102, Left at Eastgate. In November, we found out that Brenda, Butler, and Dot Street had sold the Holt document to the News of the World for £2,000. Nearly £5,000 here. Cause, solely responsible for obtaining the document with the information I provided, had sent them the copy gratis, solely to assist in their research. After that, we broke off all contact with them. I wonder if they broke off contact with Larry because they found out that it gave the story to the News of the World, because they wanted that for their book, Clear Intent. That's what I'm thinking. But he's saying £2,000, there's £25,000 now, but I suppose it's inflation.
Dot and I never sold anything to anybody,
I know
and that's the truth. Nothing.
Well, there it is. This is in Left at Eastgate. And in any case, Cause, solely responsible for obtaining the document, this is the Holt document, with the information I provided. Sure, Larry did provide information anonymously under the name Art Wallace, but also to obtain that Holt document was the letter that Jenny had received from Pam Titchmarsh, an MOD letter, admitting that something had gone down in the forest at Rendlesham at last after her badgering them for 2.5 years. And also the letter from Cochrane and Holt to Larry Fawcett and Barry Greenwood, admitting that something had gone on, but there was no documents there. So there wasn't just his information solely. Anyway, page 107 in Left at Eastgate, Keith Beebe reports, the Colonel's report confirms the strange events in the forest that night, but lacks the eyewitness detail given to us by Art Wallace. This is in Larry's own book.
Yeah.
A USAF security policeman, now back in America as a civilian. He was sent to the site in a convoy of military vehicles from nearby Bentwaters and describes what he saw. We looked up in the sky and saw a red ball of light coming towards us from the trees. There was no noise, no sound at all. We were all mesmerised. All of a sudden, the red light exploded. The place was filled with an explosion of colours, all kinds of colours. We were momentarily blinded, and when the colours died down, there was a machine. Art said there were beings in the craft, but he could not see them, as he was on the wrong side, but others did. They said there were 3 wearing silver suits. Art Wallace, we have changed his name for security reasons, tells his story on page 3. Well, on that page 3, that's by Bob Smith. Well, Bob Smith was the News of the World American correspondent. Everything was in that story that Larry Warren says is distorted beyond belief is in that interview and on that tape. So I think that more or less proves that I don't understand why Larry is saying he never spoke to him, but he did. And at that, Brenda, I think we'll end it for now. We'll catch up with John Burroughs.
Well, that was a very interesting interview you did with Brenda Butler. And now we're in the last half hour, and what we're going to do, Ronnie, now is we're going to air 3 different clips that you feel are important that have to do with Larry Warren and the News of the World. And then there'll be some other clips available on our page showing a little bit of the interview he did with Keith Beebe. But what we're going to do now is set the stage for you to explain why this first clip that you're going to talk about is important, having to do with Larry Warren and the News of the World. So go ahead, Ronnie.
Okay, so this first clip is taken from Phenomenon Radio when Larry Warren come on your show, John, and he says in several places, I want to talk about News of the World. I want to talk about News of the World. And you kept saying, yeah, okay, we'll talk about News of the World later. And in the end, he said, I want to talk about News of the World, and you're going to love this. I never, ever spoke to the News of the World. So this clip is him just saying that he never spoke to the News of the World, but then in the same sentence he contradicts himself, and he says, well, I did speak to him for 5 minutes. Well, let's just listen to the clip then, John.
Well, one morning, I got a call from Barry Greenwood, and he said, a reporter named Keith Beebe would like to speak to you because this is broken in the UK. And I'm like, what? And the News of the World, I kept thinking, I kept thinking the page 3 girls and all that, but it was the Sun. And I said, isn't that a rag? That was kind of a trashy kind of newspaper. And I didn't think much more of it than that. I spoke to Keith very briefly. He got on. He said, what's your real name? And I said, I'm not going to tell you my real name until others verify, this. And I said, and he said, well, he goes, we're having a front page thing come out Sunday with the document. And he goes, and I want to do an interview with you. I said, I'm not going to do an interview until other people do the same. And with anybody, I said, because I'm not going to do this. And so my extent of a conversation with Keith Beebe was him trying to find out what my real name was, which I think I slipped up and said it twice. And I didn't even coin that. It was done, Barry Greenwood did that. Clear Intent had come out, and the Halt member was in it. His first book, Rendlesham was ever in, was in Clear Intent. And in that book, Barry just made up a name. I didn't say make up a name. He did it. And I just didn't want my name used. I've never used a fake name. The Japs tried it with me over there, and they said, well, listen. I said, look, it's Larry Warren. Enough of this circus. But, and so out came the memo, and why it got to the News of the World, sadly, is that an attorney out of Manchester named Harry Harris sold it to them for 25,000 1983 UK pounds. And that money was distributed to one firm or another around the little team in England. That was on the early days of it. Tough times, fine. But, I never took a penny from any of that. And, but it was sold on our blood.
And on that note,
so I didn't do an interview with them at all. So those pieces and bits and pieces where I talked to the guy, he never called me back because I wouldn't let him use my real name. So all those things were bits and pieces twisted out of, wishful thinking and partial statements given to Larry Fawcett that he sent over to the team in England. And that was when I first should have walked.
Wow.
He never spoke to the News of the World. He never spoke to Keith Beebe. He only spoke to him. Keith Beebe wanted his name, and he wouldn't tell him to him, and he didn't want to speak to anyone until others had come forward. That's not a whistleblower.
And then you also heard the fact that the 25,000 pounds were mentioned too, where it wasn't 12,000 but 25. Linda, do you have anything you'd like to add to that first clip?
Well, so Ronnie, what we just heard is what's called a revisionary statement in the last few months between 2015 and 2016. And what do you have in an audio clip that totally contradicts what we just heard?
Okay, we'll play this soundbite now. This is Keith Beebe speaking to Larry Warren on the phone, ringing from Dot's home in Moulton Broad. You heard what Larry said, that he was only after his name and he wouldn't give him to him. And this is what Keith Beebe actually says. He wasn't interested in Larry Warren's name. Let's listen to the clip, John.
Okay. It's just coming. His name's Keith. Okay. See you in a minute.
Okay. Hello? Hello, how are you? Fine, sir. Good. Now, I'll get it absolutely straight from the start. I'm quite aware of the pressure that you would feel yourself under, and I fully appreciate the position. I've spoken to Larry now about four times, I think, 3 or 4 times, and he hasn't told me. I don't know who you are, and in fact I'm not at all interested, because No, it's not that, sir. It's just that I have a friend of mine that was in this thing, and he's disappeared off the face of the earth. Yes, I know, and Larry has been telling me about the situation, and I think it's absolutely clear. There's no problem about that at all. All I really would like you to say, in your own words, is what you recall happened, and it's as simple as that, really. I know you've probably told it lots of times before, and I hesitate to ask you to go through it again, but I wonder if you could for me. Sure, I just talked to a reporter based in New York from a London newspaper. Yes. And I just told him. I wonder if we've in fact tried to get one of our chaps down to Larry, because we've only just managed this link up. So you may in fact have already been talking to someone from my own organisation, but that I won't know until the morning, because for us here it's about midnight. But you might be duplicating things, but fair enough, let's go ahead. What actually happened for you? Can you remember basically what time it was and things? I'd gone on to my post. Yes. My position. And we grouped at 10 o'clock that evening. Yes. I was positioned on a post number 18, far perimeter of Butler. I shall just say that you were on the perimeter, because by saying which post you were on, you would be identified, wouldn't you? That's right, sir. Thank you. It's all right. I'm just conscious of that. So.
And if I'm understanding correctly, that this was the Keith Beebe interview with Larry Warren on the phone on Wednesday, September 28th, 1983, 4 days before the October 2nd, 1983 front page headline, byline by Keith Beebe.
That's correct. And I think the telephone conversation ended about 1 a.m. in the morning, our time.
And another thing that I kind of picked up was that Larry mentioned, and I want to make sure that I get this right, that he may have already spoken to somebody else, and that Keith mentioned what? Can you kind of cover that maybe?
Yeah, I can tell you who it was. I mean, the News of the World had already dispatched their US agent to go speak to Larry Warren. He'd done a phone conversation to him earlier in that day on the phone. Larry Warren, speaking to Dot, has already told her that he'd spoke to a reporter. I think Dot was a bit put out because she'd set this conversation for Keith to speak to Art Wallace. And she was a bit disappointed, because there's Larry saying, I've already spoke to someone. I spoke to him in much more detail than what, I've spoken to Keith. This report was sent from the News of the World organisation. His name was Bob Smith. Now, when that issue of the News of the World came out on October the 2nd, Keith Beebe's story was the front page. Then when you turn to page 3, there was a story called An Airman's Story. And then that was Bob Smith's interview with Larry Warren. Obviously, Keith hadn't talked about parts that were going to be in Bob's story, and Bob had kept his parts of the story out from Keith. So there was no point in repeating themselves, but they got basically the same story, but with 1 or 2 other bits and pieces. And then, because that weren't the end of it, Larry Warren then went to the News of the World again. This is all reported in Left at Eastgate. After he'd had his hypnosis, he went back to the News of the World and told them lots of other things, and that's reported in Left at Eastgate. What they reported on that news article, and the News of the World said our airman Art Wallace has come back to us with more information. That's reported in Left at Eastgate. If that wasn't the News of the World, I'm sure Larry or Peter or someone to do would have sued the ass off the News of the World. They would have done. That would have been easy money.
Right. So now we're going to go forward to one more sound bite that's important, that you feel it's important. So we'll set the stage for that.
Well, I think they're all important, John, but we can't play them all. So we're going to put the others on the Phenomenon website. And if we go to sound clip number 7.
Okay, set the stage for it so people understand why this one is being played.
Well, the other 3 before are talking about the incident. Well, they're all talking about the incident, his story, what he's told, and Keith Beebe. They're all just as important to each other. I think you just need to play it, and we'll comment afterwards, John.
Okay.
What other things were said about the beings? Were they described to you by anybody?
Not really. No one ever went into it too much. I think it was too much. They said they were there, and don't you remember them, and this and that. They're relatively small. No one's going to believe that they are small and all this.
Yeah.
Maybe about 4 feet.
Yeah.
I just don't know.
You don't know what. No. Now there was some film taken, wasn't there? Right at the beginning, you mentioned there was some film. Do you know what happened to that?
Yes, I do.
What happened to it?
It was put into a vault on base in a security area. And I even know someone that supposedly took some of that film.
Oh, yeah. And
they've lost track of him.
Yeah. Yes, I think I've heard about that. And this film was put into a security vault on the base.
Another security policeman also had a camera with him at that time. I've heard rumors of a tape and all this. I don't know about it.
Well, I'll tell you now, there was a tape, and that was it was a tape recorder that was held by Colonel Holt, in which he spoke into this tape, because it was after that he used that as an aid memoir to write his memorandum.
Okay.
So that checks out a bit.
Okay. I never knew actually that anyone had a tape recorder, but I knew there was another security policeman who had a camera.
Yes. Yeah.
Pictures. The very next day, they went up into his room, OSI.
Yeah.
He took his camera and film.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
He had a nervous breakdown anyway.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah, I'm not surprised. Yeah. What happened? There were 2 craft, I believe, weren't there? But you only recall seeing the one.
I must have been there for only one.
Yes.
All these different things. These were happening, I guess, during either the next month.
Yes. You don't know what.
A friend of mine, Steve LaFleur.
Yes.
In Florida now, was involved in another incident over there.
Yeah.
Where they saw these ships overflying the base.
Yeah.
And all the officers responded to it and saw it.
Yeah.
And he was involved in that. That was a month after what happened to me.
What happened? Have you any idea what happened to the craft once it had landed? Once it was there? I mean, you blacked out, but do you know? Have you learned what might have happened to it?
No, but I think I saw it again the next day, or the day after that.
Did you? What circumstances was that?
Well, we were taken to an underground facility on that base on Butler.
Yes.
And we were showing some very high technology equipment in some rooms. And I think I was in a drugged state at that point.
Yes.
All of that incident, but I lost 3 days of my time over there.
Yes.
Where other people verified that they said I was on leave.
Yeah. Yeah.
We were taken to another room. Well, not a room, but a huge area. And this craft was down below us.
This is underground. This is underground.
Yes, on that water.
Yes.
One bike, or it was that one. It was one very similar.
Yeah. What did it look like then? Can you remember?
It was light shining onto it.
Yeah.
Like the power was off or whatever.
Yeah.
And we were allowed to see that only for a short time.
Yeah. How many of you are allowed to see that?
What went through with a group of 7 people, I think. About 6 or 7 people through at this point.
Yeah. And why were you taken down there?
I don't know. This is Dad.
Intriguing, isn't it?
And that last statement by Larry Warren about going underground, over the last 33 years, the evolution of the story, including on the record in a recorded phone or a recorded interview with a mathematician and myself, where we both were recording Larry Warren in 1986 at a conference in Connecticut. Larry Warren says on the record, it's at myearthfiles.com, in a series of reports where people can read and see his own words, that he was saying and taking over the Adrian Bustinza experience and describing it as his own.
Absolutely.
So, Ronnie, on this point, it's clear that Larry Warren played an important part. And what I mean by important is the News of the World story, a lot of it was based off of the interview Larry Warren did with Keith Beebe. And what was the name of the other individual from the U.S.?
Bob Smith.
Bob Smith. So a lot of what was in the News of the World came from a direct interview from Larry Warren. Is that correct?
That's correct. If you go through the story on the front page and the page 3, you won't find anything in there that don't come out of this interview. And the interview we done with Bob Smith.
Okay. And Linda, your interview that you did after that interview, is there some things that you feel that took place in that interview that tie into the News of the World? As far as what I mean is that some of the same things he verified to you that he did in News of the World?
In the 1986 interview between Ben Jameson, a mathematician, and myself and Larry Warren in Connecticut, we ran duplicate audio tapes for 3 or 4 hours with Larry Warren, and he wanted us to understand on the record, and he gave me permission to put the entire transcript at earthfiles.com a few years ago. And he wanted us to understand that he and Adrian Bustinza shared bunks in a same barracks room, and that after one of the evenings, which may have been the 27th or the 28th of December, that Adrian Bustinza began sobbing, that was his term, began sobbing on the bed that he had sat down first to talk with Larry Warren, and then began to unfold this extraordinary story that Adrian Bustinza was taken in a car by people he didn't know to an underground facility, where he was taken into an auditorium where there were seats, a theater stage, a screen that came down, that there was a scrim, meaning that there was something like netting, that a 3 or 4 foot tall, slightly waddling humanoid came walking on the stage toward the scrim, that he could not move, that no one around him could move, that everybody was seemingly paralyzed in their seats, and that in their minds came telepathic thought, allegedly from this being who was not human, saying that they were in control of this planet, that wars were allowed for our entertainment. And then a movie ran that showed silver discs interacting in Korea, in Vietnam, in various places of the world. Some of the scenes showed the discs shooting out of the sky, some of our aircraft. Other scenes showed our aircraft shooting out of the sky, silver discs. And the bottom line was, from Larry Warren to Ben Jameson and me in 1986 in Connecticut, that he had decided to take on Adrian Bustinza's story that Adrian sobbed about, and told Adrian, I promise you I will get your story out to the world. But Larry also had his own experience that he described and told us at the time was on the middle night, December 27th, not the first night of the 26th or the third night of the 28th. This is one of the difficult parts, who had what experience on which night, and that the middle night of December 27th is what we know the least about. But that is what Larry Warren told Ben Jameson and me in 1986, 6 years later, that his experience with many people in the forest, in which he saw Gordon Williams interacting with at least one non-human near a craft, was the night of December 27th, 1980.
Okay. So as we wrap up the show tonight, I think people need to understand something that's very important. There's a lot of good information out there that happened early on with interviews. We didn't get a chance tonight to go into maybe the possibility that there was some money offered to some of the people involved other than the 12,000 pounds. And there's a lot of good material out there that Jenny, Dot, and Brenda did that needs to be looked at more closely. And one of the reasons why the News of the World is so important was the fact that the story itself was shaped off of an interview that it was done by Lawrence Warren. So on that note, I want to thank you, Ronnie, for coming on and bringing this to the people that have been following the RFI incident's attention.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, John. Thank you, Race.
For John Burroughs, Linda Moulton Howe, and myself, Race Hobbs, thank you all for joining us. Stay tuned for 3 hours of Jimmy Church Live right here on the station that brings you the very best in paranormal talk radio topics on the internet. We're KGRAradio.com. Have a great weekend, everybody.